Have you ever trusted someone so completely that when they betrayed you, it felt like the ground beneath your feet just disappeared? Have you ever been in a situation where people you considered friends, people you worked alongside every single day, showed you their true colors in the most devastating way possible? Well, let me tell you what happened to me. Because this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about justice. It's about standing up for yourself when everyone expects you to just take it and move on. It's about protecting the people you love and making sure that those who hurt them understand there are consequences. My name doesn't matter, but what matters is what I learned that night at my brother's party and what I did about it afterward. This is my truth, and I'm sharing it with you because maybe, just maybe, you've been in a similar situation or you know someone who has. And if you haven't, trust me, after hearing what I went through, you'll understand why some lines should never be crossed. I need to take you back to understand the full weight of what happened. My brother Marcus, he's not just my sibling. He's my best friend, my confidant, the person who has been there for me through every single challenge life has thrown my way. We grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and we learned early on that family was everything. Our parents worked multiple jobs to give us opportunities they never had, and Marcus and I, we made a pact when we were just kids that we'd always have each other's backs, no matter what. When our dad passed away from cancer 5 years ago, that bond only grew stronger. Marcus was there holding my hand at the funeral, and I was there supporting him when he struggled with the grief. We weren't just siblings. We were survivors, fighters, people who understood that loyalty meant something real and tangible. Marcus had been planning this party for months. It wasn't just any party. It was a celebration of his promotion to senior architect at one of the most prestigious firms in the city, a position he'd been working toward for 7 years. 7 years of late nights, sacrificed weekends, missed social events, all building toward this moment. I remember the day he called me, his voice shaking with excitement, telling me he'd finally gotten the news. I actually cried on the phone with him because I knew what this meant. It meant all those sacrifices had paid off. It meant our dad would have been so incredibly proud. It meant Marcus was finally getting the recognition he deserved. So when he told me he wanted to throw a big party to celebrate, not just with family but also with friends and some of my colleagues since we'd all gotten close over the years, I was thrilled. I wanted everyone to see how amazing my brother was, how hard he'd worked, how much he deserved this moment of triumph. Now let me tell you about my work situation because it's crucial to understanding how deep this betrayal cut. I work in corporate finance at a mid-sized investment firm. It's one of those environments where your colleagues become like family because you spend more time with them than you do with your actual relatives. 60-hour work weeks, high-pressure deals, tight deadlines. We were all in the trenches together. I'd been at the company for 4 years, and during that time, I'd built what I thought were genuine friendships with several people. There was Jennifer, my cubicle neighbor who I'd share coffee with every morning, talking about everything from work stress to relationship drama. There was David, the senior analyst who mentored me when I first started, and who I considered a real friend, someone I could trust with professional advice and personal struggles. And then there was the whole team, about 8 of us who'd go out for drinks on Fridays, celebrate birthdays together, support each other through tough projects. I genuinely believed these people cared about me. I'd been to Jennifer's wedding. I'd helped David move into his new apartment. We'd shared so many moments that felt authentic and real. So when Marcus asked if I wanted to invite some of my work friends to the party, I didn't hesitate. I thought it would be great for them to meet my brother, to celebrate this incredible milestone with us, to be part of something meaningful in my life outside of work. I invited 6 people from the office: Jennifer, David, Michael, Lisa, Tom, and Rachel. They all seemed excited. They all RSVP'd enthusiastically, and they all promised to be there to celebrate. I remember feeling this warm sense of gratitude that I had such a great group of people in my life, both at work and at home. The party was scheduled for a Saturday evening at Marcus's new apartment. He'd just moved into this beautiful place in the downtown area, a 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city skyline that took your breath away. He'd spent weeks getting everything ready, planning the menu, creating a playlist, making sure every detail was perfect. My mom flew in from out of state, and several of Marcus's closest friends from architecture school made the trip. It was going to be intimate, maybe 40 people total, but every single person there meant something to us. This wasn't some generic celebration. This was family and chosen family coming together to honor someone we loved. I arrived early that Saturday to help Marcus set up. The apartment looked incredible. He'd strung up lights on the balcony, set up a bar area in the corner, arranged furniture to create conversation spaces. We spent the afternoon cooking together, laughing, reminiscing about childhood memories, talking about how far we'd both come. There was this moment when we were in the kitchen, and he just stopped what he was doing, looked at me, and said, "Thank you for always believing in me." I got emotional because I realized that's what family does. We believe in each other even when the world doesn't, even when things get hard, even when success feels impossible. That moment right there, that was what this party was really about. It wasn't about showing off or impressing people. It was about acknowledging the journey and the people who walked it with you. Guests started arriving around 7. The energy was beautiful. Marcus's friends were warm and welcoming. My mom was in her element chatting with everyone, and the apartment filled with laughter and conversation. My colleagues from work showed up around 7:30, and at first everything seemed fine. They brought wine, they congratulated Marcus, they seemed genuinely happy to be there. I introduced them to my mom, to Marcus's girlfriend Sarah, to some of our family friends. For the first hour or so, I felt proud. I felt like I was sharing two important parts of my life, my family and my work friends, and they were all blending together beautifully. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have such great people surrounding me. But then I started noticing things. Small things at first. Jennifer and Lisa were whispering in the corner, and when I walked over, they suddenly stopped talking and changed the subject. David was on his phone constantly, which was unusual for a social gathering. Michael and Tom were drinking heavily, much more than I'd ever seen them drink at our Friday happy hours. There was this energy shift that I couldn't quite put my finger on, but something felt off. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, that everyone was just having a good time and I was overthinking it. But that feeling in my gut, that instinct that something wasn't right, it kept growing stronger. Around 9 o'clock, Marcus gave a short speech thanking everyone for coming and sharing this moment with him. It was beautiful and heartfelt, talking about the journey, the challenges, the people who supported him. Everyone raised their glasses, and there was this moment of pure joy and celebration. I was standing next to my mom, both of us with tears in our eyes, so proud of Marcus and so grateful for this moment. But as I looked around the room during that toast, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Jennifer was smirking, actually smirking during my brother's speech. And when I followed her gaze, I saw she was looking at her phone, and David was looking over her shoulder, and they were both trying to suppress laughter. My heart started racing. What could possibly be funny during such a meaningful moment? I tried to catch Jennifer's eye, but she deliberately looked away. The speech ended, people clapped, and the party continued, but I couldn't shake what I'd seen. I decided to keep a closer watch on my colleagues, and that's when I started noticing more disturbing things. They'd gathered in their own little group, separate from everyone else, and they were clearly talking about something that was making them laugh. Not genuine, joyful laughter. This was mocking laughter, mean laughter, the kind of laughter that makes your stomach turn because you know someone is being cruel. I walked over to their group, trying to act casual, and asked if everything was okay. Jennifer immediately put her phone away and everyone got quiet. "Everything's great," she said with this fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your brother's place is nice." There was something in the way she emphasized nice that felt condescending, like she was being sarcastic. David changed the subject quickly, asking about the food, but I could see them all exchanging glances. I knew something was happening, but I didn't know what yet. I didn't know that in just a few minutes my entire world was about to shatter. I didn't know that these people I trusted, these people I considered friends, were about to show me exactly who they really were. Have you ever had that moment where you're on the edge of a revelation that you know will change everything? That's where I was standing, on the precipice of a truth I wasn't ready for but couldn't avoid. I excused myself and went to check on Marcus and my mom. They were both beaming, completely unaware of the darkness brewing in the corner of the apartment. Marcus was showing some of his architecture friends the designs he'd been working on for his new position, and my mom was deep in conversation with Sarah about wedding plans since they'd just gotten engaged a few months earlier. Everything in this part of the room was exactly as it should be. Love, support, genuine celebration. But I couldn't enjoy it because I kept glancing over at my colleagues, watching them huddle together, watching them laugh at something on someone's phone, watching them completely disconnect from the purpose of this gathering. Around 10 o'clock, I decided to go to the bathroom, which meant walking past where my work friends had congregated near the balcony. As I approached, I heard Marcus's name. I stopped just out of sight, and what I heard next made me feel like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Can you believe she invited us to this?" That was Lisa's voice, dripping with disdain. "I mean, it's cute that her brother got a promotion, But did we really need to spend our Saturday night at this little party? Michael laughed, and I heard him say, "At least the free alcohol is decent. That's the only reason I came." My hands started shaking. I wanted to walk away, but I couldn't move. I needed to hear more, even though every word felt like a knife. Then Jennifer spoke, and her words destroyed me. "Did you guys see the photos I've been taking? This is going to be perfect for the group chat. Marcus's little celebration for his mediocre promotion. The apartment that's trying so hard to be impressive but falls short. And oh my God, did you see what his mom is wearing? I've been documenting everything. Wait until the rest of the office sees this." There was laughter, genuine amusement at tearing apart my family, my brother's achievement, my mother. David chimed in, "I can't wait to show this to Patterson on Monday. He's going to love how our finance girl lives. So much for all her professional talk at the office. This is who she really is." Rachel, who I'd always thought was the kindest of the group, added, "Should we post some of this on social media? I mean, not tagged obviously, but just for the laughs." I felt like I couldn't breathe. These people weren't here to celebrate with me. They were here to mock, to judge, to gather material to humiliate me and my family at work. They'd come into my brother's home, drunk his alcohol, pretended to be happy for him, all while planning to turn this beautiful moment into entertainment for the office. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I actually had to lean against the wall to steady myself. My vision blurred with tears that I refused to let fall. Not yet, not where they could see. Tom's voice cut through my shock. "Honestly, I don't even know why she invited us. It's not like we're actually friends. She's just the girl in the cubicle who thinks she's part of our group. This party is so beneath us. I have better things to do than watch her brother celebrate getting a job that my college roommate got right out of school." More laughter. More cruel, dismissive laughter at my brother's expense, at my expense, at everything we'd worked for, and everything this night meant to us. Jennifer added, "Well, at least we'll have great stories for Monday. And honestly, the photos are gold. Her mom looks like she shops at thrift stores. The decorations are so basic. And Marcus's speech was so cheesy I almost couldn't keep a straight face." Something inside me snapped. Not into anger yet, but into this cold, crystalline clarity. These people had shown me exactly who they were, and I was going to make absolutely certain they regretted it. But not now. Not here at Marcus's party. I wouldn't let them ruin this night any more than they already had. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I wouldn't create a scene that would overshadow Marcus's celebration. No, my response would be calculated, strategic, and devastating. I would make them pay professionally and personally for what they'd done, but I would do it on my terms, in my time, in my way. I took a deep breath, wiped away the tears that had started to form, and walked back into the party like nothing had happened. I avoided my colleagues for the rest of the night, focusing on Marcus, on my mom, on the guests who were actually there for the right reasons. I laughed and celebrated and made sure Marcus never knew that anything was wrong. This was his night, and I wouldn't let these toxic people steal that from him. But inside, I was already planning. My mind was working through every possible move, every connection I had, every piece of leverage I could use. They thought I was just some naive girl who didn't understand how corporate politics worked. They thought they could mock my family without consequences. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The party ended around midnight. My colleagues left with fake smiles and empty thanks, completely unaware that I'd heard everything. Jennifer even hugged me goodbye and said, "This was so fun. Your brother seems great." The audacity of her pretending, of maintaining that facade, even as she was planning to humiliate me. It took everything in me not to tell her exactly what I thought of her right there, but I smiled back, thanked her for coming, and watched them all walk out the door. Marcus was cleaning up, tired but happy, and when he asked if I'd had a good time, I lied and said it was perfect. Because for him, it had been perfect. He didn't need to know about the poison that had infiltrated his celebration. I stayed to help Marcus clean up, and then I went home to my apartment. The moment I closed my door, I broke down. I cried harder than I'd cried since my father's funeral, not just because of the betrayal, but because I felt so stupid. How had I not seen who these people really were? How had I been so blind to their true nature? All those coffees with Jennifer, all those conversations with David, all those Friday happy hours, had any of it been real? Or had they been laughing at me the whole time, seeing me as some pathetic girl who didn't realize she was the joke? The humiliation was overwhelming, and for a few hours, I just let myself feel it. I let myself grieve the friendships I thought I had, the trust I'd placed in people who didn't deserve it. But then, As the sun started to rise on Sunday morning, something shifted. The grief turned into determination. The humiliation transformed into resolve. I wasn't going to be a victim in this story. I wasn't going to let them get away with what they'd done. I'd spent years building my reputation at that company, working harder than most of my colleagues, proving myself over and over again. I had skills they didn't appreciate and connections they didn't know about. I knew things about how that office operated that they'd underestimated. And most importantly, I knew exactly who they really were now, while they still thought I was clueless. I started making a list. Everything I knew about each of them, every mistake I'd witnessed, every shortcut they'd taken, every questionable decision they'd made. I thought about the company's values, the code of conduct we'd all signed, the expectations for professional behavior. I considered the power dynamics in the office, who reported to whom, who had influence, who made decisions about promotions and terminations. I mapped out the social networks, understanding who was friends with whom, who had conflicts, who could be allies. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. This was about justice. This was about making sure they understood that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people the way they'd treated me and my family without facing repercussions. Monday morning came, and I walked into that office with my head held high. I'd spent Sunday preparing, researching, planning every single move. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I knew it was going to take time. This wasn't going to be some quick confrontation. This was going to be a chess game, and I was prepared to play it better than they could imagine. When I saw Jennifer at her cubicle that morning, she gave me that same fake smile. "How was the rest of your weekend?" she asked, as if she hadn't spent Saturday night mocking my family. I smiled back and said, "It was great. Really productive, actually." She had no idea what I meant, but she would soon enough. The group chat messages started appearing on Monday afternoon. I know this because Michael was careless with his phone, and I saw notifications popping up on his screen when he left it on his desk during a meeting. The group chat name was visible for just a second, but it was enough. Finance Follies. My stomach turned, but I kept my expression neutral. They'd actually created a dedicated chat just to mock me, and probably others in the office too. This wasn't just about what happened at the party. This was a pattern of behavior, a culture of cruelty that they'd been cultivating, and I was just one of many targets. That realization actually helped. It meant I wasn't alone in this. It meant there were probably others who'd been hurt by these people, others who might be willing to stand with me if I approached this the right way. I started documenting everything. Every interaction, every conversation, every time I saw them gathered together whispering and laughing. I kept detailed notes with timestamps. I started paying attention to their work product, and I noticed something interesting. A lot of the presentations David was taking credit for, the analysis that was earning him praise from upper management, it looked very familiar. In fact, some of it was based on research and frameworks that other junior analysts had developed but never got credit for. He'd been taking ideas from people below him, polishing them just enough to claim them as his own, and building his reputation on other people's work. Jennifer, meanwhile, had been cutting corners on compliance checks for months. I'd noticed it before but hadn't thought much of it, assuming she knew what she was doing. But now, looking more carefully, I could see that she was skipping steps that were required by regulatory standards. It hadn't caused problems yet, but it was only a matter of time before something went wrong, and when it did, the company could face serious consequences. This wasn't just about being mean. These people were actually putting the company at risk with their behavior, and that gave me leverage I hadn't expected. Tom and Michael, I discovered, had been padding their expense reports. Nothing huge, but consistent small amounts that added up over time. A client dinner that was actually just the two of them. Ubers charged to the company that were personal trips. Hotel stays claimed as business when they were actually just weekend getaways. Again, not massive fraud, but clear violations of company policy that could absolutely be grounds for termination if brought to the right people's attention with proper documentation. Lisa was having an affair with a senior partner, something that was explicitly against company policy given the power dynamics involved. I didn't want to use this unless I had to because it felt too personal, but it was information worth having. And Rachel, sweet Rachel, who'd suggested posting photos from the party on social media, she'd been sharing confidential client information with friends outside the company to make herself seem important and connected. I'd overheard her on the phone several times, dropping names and details about deals that were supposed to be under strict confidentiality. Any one of these issues could cause serious problems for these people if reported to the right departments with the right evidence. All of them together. That was enough to dismantle their careers entirely. But I had to be smart about this. I couldn't just go to HR with a list of complaints because that would be obvious, and it would make me look vindictive. I needed to let the consequences unfold naturally, to plant seeds that would grow into their own downfall, to position myself as concerned about the company rather than vengeful toward individuals. I started with the compliance issue because it was the most objective and the most serious. I drafted an anonymous email to our compliance department outlining the specific instances where I'd noticed shortcuts being taken, providing dates and transaction numbers but not naming Jennifer directly. I framed it as a concerned employee worried about potential regulatory exposure. Compliance departments take these things seriously because their job is to protect the company from exactly these kinds of risks. Within days, they launched a quiet internal review of recent transactions. Jennifer was one of several people whose work was examined, so it didn't immediately point back to me. The review took about 2 weeks, and during that time, I watched Jennifer become increasingly stressed. She started staying late, going back through old files, clearly trying to cover her tracks. But it was too late. The compliance team found multiple instances where proper procedures hadn't been followed, and while they didn't terminate her immediately, she was put on a formal performance improvement plan with strict oversight. Every single transaction she processed now had to be reviewed by a senior compliance officer. Her reputation as an efficient, trusted analyst was shattered. Partners who used to give her high-profile deals started routing them to other team members. She was essentially sidelined, and everyone in the office noticed. While that was unfolding, I had a strategic conversation with Patterson, the partner that David had mentioned during the party. Patterson was known for being extremely particular about intellectual property and proper attribution of work. I mentioned casually during a project discussion that I'd noticed some interesting similarities between a recent presentation David had delivered and some preliminary work that a junior analyst, Maria, had done months ago. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I just asked Patterson if he knew whether David had collaborated with Maria or built on her initial research, because if so, it would be great to make sure she got appropriate recognition. I planted the seed carefully, knowing Patterson would investigate. Patterson did exactly what I expected. He started asking questions, pulling files, comparing documents. Within a week, he discovered that David had indeed taken Maria's work, along with contributions from 2 other junior analysts, and presented it as his own original analysis. This was a huge violation of firm culture and ethics. We had explicit policies about collaboration and attribution because our reputation depended on integrity. Patterson was furious, and he made sure senior management knew about it. David was called into a meeting with HR and several partners. He tried to defend himself, claiming he'd simply built upon existing research, which was normal practice. But the evidence was clear. He'd presented work as original when it was derivative, and he'd taken credit that belonged to others. The firm's response was swift. David wasn't fired immediately, but he was removed from all major projects and reassigned to supporting roles on deals he'd previously led. His trajectory toward making partner, which had seemed almost certain, was now completely derailed. The other analysts who he'd stolen from were given public recognition for their contributions, and the message was clear. This behavior wouldn't be tolerated. David's reputation was destroyed, and he knew it. I saw him in the break room one day, and he looked defeated, exhausted, like someone who'd lost everything he'd been working for. Part of me felt satisfied. Part of me felt sad that it had come to this. But mostly, I felt like justice was being served. Tom and Michael's expense report padding came to light through an automated audit system that flagged unusual patterns in expense submissions. I didn't even have to report this one directly. I just made sure to mention to someone in finance during a completely innocent conversation about my own expense report that I'd noticed the system had gotten much stricter lately and was flagging things I'd never seen flagged before. That person mentioned it to someone else, who mentioned it to someone in internal audit, and suddenly there was increased scrutiny on expense reports across the board. Tom and Michael's patterns were obvious once someone was actually looking. The amounts weren't huge, but the pattern was clear and consistent. They were called in for meetings with finance and HR. Both of them had to repay the improperly claimed expenses, which came to several $1,000s each. More importantly, they were put on notice that any future violations would result in immediate termination. Their credibility was shot, and everyone in the office knew why they'd been called in. The whispers in the hallways, the looks from colleagues, the loss of trust from management. It was all part of the consequence they were facing. Lisa's situation resolved itself in an unexpected way. The senior partner she was involved with decided to leave the firm for another opportunity, and Lisa, perhaps realizing that her protection was gone, started looking for jobs elsewhere. I didn't have to do anything there. The natural consequences of their choices were playing out without my intervention. Rachel's confidentiality breaches came to light when one of the friends she'd been sharing information with made a comment at an industry event that got back to our firm. Someone connected the dots, and suddenly, Rachel was under investigation for sharing privileged client information. This was one of the most serious violations possible in our industry. Client confidentiality is sacred, and breaking it is grounds for immediate termination and potentially legal action. Rachel was fired within a week of the investigation concluding. She didn't just lose her job, she lost her reputation in the industry. Word spread quickly in our professional community, and I knew she'd have a hard time finding comparable work after this. But I wasn't done yet. The professional consequences were important, but they weren't enough. These people had mocked my family, my brother's achievement, my mother's appearance. They'd come into my brother's home with false smiles and cruel intentions. That required a more personal response, something that would make them understand the human cost of their actions, not just the professional ones. I started with Jennifer because she'd been the ringleader at the party. I knew she was dating someone seriously, a guy she'd been with for about a year and was hoping would propose soon. She talked about him constantly at work, showing us photos, telling us about their dates, planning their future together. I also knew, because Jennifer couldn't keep her mouth shut, that she'd been less than honest with him about several things, including the fact that she'd previously dated one of our colleagues, and they'd had an overlap with her current relationship. I didn't have to do much. I simply made sure that Jennifer's boyfriend Tom, a different Tom, was at the same coffee shop as Jennifer and her ex-colleague during one of their lunches. These lunches happened regularly, something Jennifer had convinced her boyfriend was just professional networking. But watching them together, the body language, the intimacy of their conversation, it told a different story. I didn't say anything to Jennifer's boyfriend directly. I didn't have to. He saw what he needed to see, and within a few days, Jennifer came into work with red eyes and no engagement ring. Her relationship was over, and from what I overheard, her boyfriend had ended things specifically because he'd realized she'd been dishonest about the nature of her relationship with her ex. For David, the personal consequence came through his own pride. He'd always been extremely status conscious, constantly talking about where he went to school, who his family knew, what clubs he belonged to. His whole identity was wrapped up in being seen as successful and important. The professional downfall I'd engineered had already damaged that image significantly. But I made sure it was widely known by strategically mentioning to the right people at the right times that David's fall from grace was due to taking credit for others' work. In our industry, in our social circles, that's one of the worst possible reputations to have. It's not just about being unethical. It's about being incompetent, needing to steal from others because you can't produce quality work yourself. I watched David's social standing crumble. Invitations to industry events dried up. Colleagues stopped seeking his opinion. He became professionally isolated, and for someone like David, that was perhaps the worst punishment possible. Michael and Tom faced personal consequences through their own behavior. The stress of the expense report scandal led to conflicts in their personal lives. Michael's wife was furious when she found out he'd been padding expense reports, not because of the money, but because of the dishonesty and the risk to their family's financial security. Tom's girlfriend broke up with him around the same time, citing his inability to take responsibility for his actions and his pattern of blaming others for his problems. I didn't cause these relationship issues directly, but I'd created the circumstances that revealed who these men really were to the people closest to them. The masks they'd worn so carefully were ripped away, and the people who loved them had to decide if they could accept what was underneath. But there was still one more thing I needed to do, something that went beyond individual consequences. I needed to make sure that what had happened at Marcus's party, and the culture that had enabled it, was addressed systemically. I reached out to several other junior employees at the firm, people I'd noticed being excluded from the in-group, people who'd been on the receiving end of dismissive comments or condescending behavior. I organized informal coffee meetings, one-on-one conversations where I asked about their experiences at the firm. What I discovered was heartbreaking but not surprising. There was a pervasive culture of bullying and exclusion among certain groups, particularly the clique that Jennifer, David, and the others belonged to. Multiple people shared stories of being mocked, having their work stolen, being excluded from opportunities, feeling unsafe speaking up because they were afraid of retaliation. Armed with this information, I put together a comprehensive but anonymous report detailing the patterns of behavior, providing specific examples without identifying individuals initially, and submitting it to HR as a cultural concern that was affecting employee morale and potentially exposing the company to liability. I framed it carefully, focusing on the business case for addressing these issues. Decreased productivity, increased turnover among talented junior employees, potential legal exposure, damage to the firm's reputation if these patterns became public. HR took it seriously, especially coming on the heels of all the individual incidents that had recently come to light. They launched a broader investigation into workplace culture, started conducting confidential interviews with employees at all levels, and implemented new policies around professional conduct and accountability. Several people from that toxic clique ended up leaving the firm over the following months, some voluntarily and some not. The culture began to shift. People who'd been afraid to speak up started finding their voices. Junior employees who'd been struggling in silence started reporting concerns and getting support. It wasn't perfect, and change didn't happen overnight, but there was movement in the right direction. The firm brought in consultants to do training on professional conduct, implemented a more robust system for reporting concerns, and made it clear from the top down that the old culture of exclusion and cruelty wouldn't be tolerated anymore. Through all of this, I maintained my professionalism. I never gloated, never revealed that I'd been the catalyst for these consequences, never dropped my mask of concerned colleague just trying to do good work. People suspected, I'm sure. The timing was too coincidental, and I'd been close to several of the situations. But no one could prove anything, and I made sure to always appear sympathetic when discussing what had happened to Jennifer or David or the others. It's such a shame, I'd say. I hope they're able to recover from this. And I meant it, in a way. I didn't hate these people. I just couldn't let what they'd done go unanswered. The most satisfying moment came about 6 months after the party. I was promoted to senior analyst, a position that put me on the same level David had been before his fall, and actually above where Jennifer had been before her compliance issues. The promotion was based on merit, on the quality of my work and my contributions to the firm, but it felt like vindication nonetheless. I'd proven that I belonged in this industry, that I was competent and professional and worthy of respect. The people who'd mocked me and my family were gone or diminished, and I was thriving. That felt like the ultimate justice. I called Marcus the day I got the promotion news. I told him everything, the whole story from the party to the consequences I'd engineered to this moment of triumph. He was quiet for a long time after I finished talking. Then he said, "I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm sorry my party became the catalyst for such pain. But I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, for standing up for our family, for making sure there were consequences. You didn't do this out of cruelty. You did it out of justice. And there's a difference." His words meant everything to me because Marcus understood. He understood that this wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries, about respect, about making sure that people who cross certain lines understand there's a price to pay. My mom's reaction was different. When I told her what had happened, she cried. Not because of what they'd said about her, though I know that hurt, but because she was worried about me. "Honey," she said, "I don't want you to become bitter. I don't want what they did to change who you are." And that gave me pause. Had I changed? Was I still the same person who'd walked into that party with an open heart and genuine excitement about sharing two parts of my life? I had to sit with that question for a while. The answer I came to was this. I'd changed. Yes, but not in the way my mom feared. I'd become more aware, more careful about who I trusted, more strategic about protecting myself and the people I loved. But I hadn't become cruel. I hadn't become vindictive. I'd simply learned that kindness doesn't mean being a doormat, and forgiveness doesn't mean avoiding consequences. Looking back now, almost a year after that party, I can see the full picture more clearly. What those people did was wrong, unquestionably, and completely wrong. But it also revealed something I needed to see about the environment I was in and the people I'd surrounded myself with. Their betrayal, as painful as it was, became a catalyst for positive change, not just for me, but for others at the firm who'd been suffering in silence. The consequences they faced weren't just punitive, they were corrective, pushing the entire organization toward a healthier, more respectful culture. I won't lie and say I don't still feel the sting sometimes. There are moments when I remember hearing them laugh at my brother's speech, or recall the cruel things they said about my mom, and I feel that same punch of betrayal all over again. But those moments are less frequent now, and when they come, I remind myself of what I learned through this experience. I learned that my instincts about people matter, that when something feels off, I should trust that feeling. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was, capable of fighting back strategically and effectively when someone hurts me or the people I love. I learned that justice isn't always loud or immediate, but it can be thorough and meaningful if you're patient and smart about it. I also learned about the difference between public victory and private victory. Publicly, no one knows the full extent of what I did to orchestrate the consequences those people faced. My role remains largely invisible, and that's how I want it. But privately, I know. I know that I stood up for myself and my family. I know that I didn't let cruelty go unanswered. I know that I used my intelligence and my understanding of systems to create change that benefited more people than just myself. That private knowledge, that internal sense of having done the right thing in the right way, that's worth more than any public recognition could ever be. The relationship with Marcus grew even stronger through this experience. He saw me not just as his little sister, but as someone capable of handling serious challenges with grace and strategy. We talk more openly now about the difficulties we face in our professional lives, the challenges of navigating environments where not everyone has good intentions. He's become more careful too, more aware of who he lets into his inner circle, more protective of his own boundaries. In a strange way, what happened at his party made both of us wiser and more resilient. I still work at the same firm, though it's a different place now than it was a year ago. The culture shift that started with my anonymous report and the various individual incidents has continued to evolve. We have new leadership in several departments, new policies around conduct and accountability, and a general atmosphere that feels healthier and more supportive. I've built genuine friendships with colleagues who share my values, people who I've vetted carefully, and who have proven themselves trustworthy through their actions over time. I'm more cautious now, yes, but I haven't become closed off. I've just learned to be more discerning. When I think about the people who betrayed me, I feel mostly indifference now. Jennifer works at a smaller firm in a less prestigious position. David left finance entirely and is doing something in tech that he seems to be struggling with based on his LinkedIn updates. Michael and Tom are at different companies, both in lateral moves rather than the upward trajectories they'd been on. Lisa got married and moved to a different city. Rachel, as far as I know, is still trying to rebuild her career after the confidentiality breach destroyed her reputation. Their lives moved on, and so did mine, but in very different directions. Sometimes people ask me if I have any regrets about how I handled the situation. The honest answer is no, I don't. Could I have handled it differently? Sure. I could have confronted them directly at the party, creating a scene and probably ruining Marcus's celebration even more than their presence already had. I could have done nothing. Let them get away with their cruelty and continued working alongside them while swallowing my pain. I could have quit my job and started over somewhere else, letting them chase me out of a position I'd earned and a career I'd built. But none of those options felt right. What I did, the path I chose, it felt like the appropriate response to the specific harm that was done. It was measured, it was strategic, and it was effective. There's something powerful about knowing you can protect yourself and the people you love. Not through violence or obvious revenge, but through understanding systems and people and consequences. I learned that I have agency in situations where I initially felt powerless. I learned that betrayal, while painful, doesn't have to define you or defeat you. It can teach you, strengthen you, and push you to create positive change that extends beyond your personal situation. That's what happened here. What started as a response to personal pain became a catalyst for systemic improvement that helped people I didn't even know were struggling. I want to be clear about something important. What I did was not about destroying people for the sake of destruction. Every consequence that befell those individuals was directly related to choices they'd made and boundaries they'd crossed. The compliance issues Jennifer faced were because she actually was cutting corners on important procedures. The attribution problems David encountered were because he actually was stealing other people's work. The expense report violations Tom and Michael dealt with were because they actually were padding their reports. Rachel's termination was because she actually was sharing confidential information. I didn't fabricate these issues. I simply made sure they came to light in ways that would lead to appropriate consequences. That distinction matters to me. This was about accountability, not fabrication. This was about ensuring that existing wrongs were addressed, not creating new wrongs to punish old ones. If you're reading this and you've been through something similar, if someone has betrayed your trust or mocked your family or crossed a line they shouldn't have crossed, I want you to know that you don't have to just accept it. You don't have to smile and pretend everything is fine. You don't have to let people treat you poorly because confrontation feels scary or uncomfortable. But I also want you to think carefully about your response. React from a place of clarity and purpose, not from raw emotion. Take time to understand the full situation, to gather information, to plan your approach. Think about what justice actually looks like in your specific circumstance. Sometimes it's about professional consequences. Sometimes it's about personal boundaries. Sometimes it's about systemic change. Often it's about all three. And if you're someone who's ever been the person making fun of others, mocking their families, betraying their trust, I want you to understand something crucial. Your actions have consequences that extend far beyond the moment. What you say and do when you think no one important is watching, that defines who you really are. The way you treat people who can't immediately fight back, that reveals your character. And eventually, somehow, those consequences catch up with you. Maybe not immediately, maybe not obviously, but they come. The universe has a way of balancing the scales, sometimes with a little help from the people you've wronged. I'm sharing this story not to encourage others to seek revenge, but to encourage you to seek justice. There's a difference. Revenge is about making someone suffer because they made you suffer. Justice is about ensuring that wrong actions lead to appropriate consequences, that people are held accountable for their choices, that systems improve so others don't face the same harm. Everything I did was aimed at justice, at creating a world where behavior like what happened at that party has real costs, where people think twice before mocking others, where workplace cultures value respect and integrity. So here I am, nearly a year later, in a better position professionally than I was before this all started, with stronger relationships with the people who truly matter, and with a deeper understanding of my own strength and capabilities. The people who tried to make me feel small, who mocked my family and my life, they're dealing with the consequences of their choices. And I'm thriving. That feels like the right ending to this chapter of my story. Not because I destroyed them, but because I stood up for myself and created conditions for justice to unfold. That's the truth I wanted to share with you today. That's the lesson I learned through one of the most painful experiences of my life. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it was long, and I appreciate you staying with me through all of it. If this resonated with you, if you've been through something similar, I want to hear about it. Please share your experience in the comments below. Tell me how you handled betrayal, how you stood up for yourself, how you protected your family. Your stories matter, and sharing them helps all of us feel less alone in these difficult experiences. And if you learned something from what I went through, if this story gave you insight into how to handle your own challenging situations, please hit that like button. It helps others find this story and maybe get the perspective they need when they're facing their own battles. Don't forget to subscribe to my Truth Revealed Tales for more stories like this. Real experiences from real people navigating the complicated world of relationships, work, family, and justice. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. We share these truths every week because everyone deserves to know they're not alone, that others have faced similar challenges, and that it's possible to come out stronger on the other side. Thanks again for being here, for listening, for caring. Until next time, remember, you deserve respect, your family deserves respect, and when someone crosses that line, you have every right to make sure there are consequences.